Citizen Mike Show. News, commentary, interviews. The Citizen Mike Show starts now.
Thanks for tuning in. We do appreciate it. My name is Mike Burdinsky. This is the episode for October 20, 2016. On my right, the editor of the paper we all read every morning, Ralph Tomaselli. Ralph, I think, for the last couple of shows, maybe we didn't do your story of the week, but this time we're changing it up a little. This is the commentary of the week.
Right.
Take it away.
Okay.
That drum roll was a little. We had to wait for the drum roll.
I appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mike. And the commentary of the week, is an editorial titled "Old Sites, New Purposes."
Okay.
And the editorial takes a look at the redevelopment of old sites for new purposes in both Southington and Meriden. And we chose to write about this because in both places we've seen a lot of creative approaches, some might say risky approaches, to trying to spur economic development in the context of grand lists, and this especially applies to the Southington situation. I mean, grand lists or revenues in towns have been sluggish at best. It's something that really hasn't come back since the recession, and so some towns are taking more risks. And in Southington, the latest example is a piece of property called the Beaton and Corbin factory, which is in the downtown area, long vacant, and it's definitely contaminated. And the town will in essence take over, purchase the property, clean it up, and then turn it over to a developer. And this, of course, is the second time that Southington, at least the second time Southington has gotten involved in this. A project that they started on almost 10 years ago called Greenway Commons, which will eventually have 180, or at least plan for 180 apartments, condominiums, was started on almost a decade ago, before the recession, and that factory has now been cleaned up, torn down, and the developer says they are ready to begin work. And the editorial kind of praises Southington. And, of course, downtown Meriden has many similar projects. Because these projects take coordination, they require some combination of federal, state, sometimes local tax breaks to become reality, and we just encourage them for that.
Well, do you see the kind of mindset that led Southington to take on these projects and led Meriden to take on these projects? Do you see that kind of mindset in Wallingford?
Well, no, not quite the same. I think there's a lot of good there's economic development efforts that go on in Wallingford. But what is different I would say, about Southington and Meriden is that there's cooperation between the Planning and Zoning Commission, the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Town Council, the city, the town manager or city manager, and state legislators. It takes one thing I notice about Southington especially is how much coordinated effort it takes just to get things done. And if you have, if anywhere in the chain you don't have clear direction or clear purpose, it's really hard to get anything done. And it is what I see in Wallingford is, quite honestly, I just don't see the mayor and all members of the council always on the same page in terms of how to go about economic development.
So I'm trying to
Yeah.
I'm trying to tease out Ralph Tomaselli's
Yeah.
lessons for Wallingford, and
Right.
I think what I'm hearing is, first, it takes a long time.
Takes a long time.
You have to have patience. It can be a project-by-project
Absolutely.
basis rather than a grand
No, absolutely.
scheme.
Southington does it project by project.
And also, there's a leadership.
Thank you.
function
I think that's
that,
right. There has to be leadership, and you can't have, for example, in Wallingford, we now have the Planning and Zoning Commission trying to deal with downtown parking, but I don't know if they're dealing with downtown parking as part of an overall effort to deal with. I don't know. Maybe they are, but I don't get that impression. Also in Wallingford, I've never had the feeling that our state representatives and the mayor are necessarily on the same page. And we just had a recent example of that, because you've got Mayor Dickinson spending a state grant for one thing,
No.
and Mary Mashinsky saying, no, you can't do that.
It's
And
the Board of Ed.
that's the board, and it's got nothing to do with economic development, but
Right.
it's a good, if you can't even agree, on how a grant should be spent, it concerns me that you'd be able to work on something like economic development and the state money that might be available for that.
I hear you, I think, yeah.
Okay.
I'm hearing your comments. I don't think there is a mindset in Wallingford like there is in Southington or in Meriden. I guess the closest we come is a plan of conservation and development, but that doesn't seem to be taken very seriously. And the last one,
Right.
even the current one,
Right.
doesn't seem to be taken very seriously. At least the way they set up this implementation committee, to me anyway, it was a signal that this is going to drift into oblivion and dust on the shelf. But it's too early to tell. But good commentary.
Yeah, thank
I'd like, maybe we ought to switch
Okay.
from story of the week to
Okay.
commentary of the week.
I'll go to-
I think we
I'll
ought
go
to
to
do
work
that.
on that. I'll try,
So-
see what I can do with that.
The other thing that caught my eye, I
Good.
think that was in today's paper, was this story about Eversource, which is the power company, of course, cutting down a bunch of trees on its right-of-way, and that has caught the attention of residents that live next to these power lines. And I guess what's happened after the storm of 2011, the feds or some governmental authority said in order to prevent power outages, you've got to be more aggressive on your tree trimming program. Eversource has taken a while, but the story says that in August they notified a lot of people, or the people living next to the power lines, that trees are going to come down. The way I read the reporting, and this is by Matt Zabarek on the October 18 edition of the Record Journal, some people tried to get to the bottom of what's going on. They met with the mayor, they met with state reps, but there's still a lot of questions, and that led, I guess, the mayor to suggest that Eversource make a presentation to the town council. Take it from there. What are the other little details that we need to know about this?
Well, the thing I would say, to put this in context, is
Yeah.
we see this questioning of Eversource's tree cutting in a lot of the other towns that we cover. We don't usually see it in Wallingford, because Wallingford has an electric division, and the electric division takes care of the tree cutting. And for the most part, as far as I know, it must be done, it's done in a way that there isn't as much contention, and I don't want to say that there isn't. I don't want to say that there's never any objection to the tree trimming that the Wallingford Electric Division does, but it just doesn't bubble up the way it does when it deals with Eversource. And as someone who's dealt with the Wallingford Electric Division tree cutting service, I can attest, I was very pleased with it. So the reason that Eversource is involved here is because we're talking about these large transmission lines that cut through town from about where the Tradition Golf Course is when I first start picking them up and run straight through almost to Cheshire, I believe, is
Yeah.
the way they run. So that's why there's this. This is usually something that is a local matter. The layer of Eversource and state legislators is usually not involved.
So the story reports a letter that Eversource sent to these residents, and part of the letter said Eversource is scheduled to remove all tall,
Yeah.
growing tree species in an expanded area of the transmission right-of-way. And that's somewhat, I think, drastic language, but maybe accurate language. And I think the concern is, wow, they may be telling it like it is, and it kind of sounds like clear cutting. But
Right.
we don't really
No.
know. Some neighborhoods are going to be impacted more than others, and maybe no neighborhood really knows to what extent suddenly they're going to be exposed to these power lines because their trees are gone, the buffer on each side of the tree. There was a representative from the Pilgrims Harbor neighborhoods
Right.
quoted in the paper, and she told, I think, the Record Journal that some people claim that their properties will be devalued by 30%. That's a subjective view,
Yeah.
but that's how she sees it. So they're coming in front of the Wallingford Town Council. Tom Laffin, the vice chair of the council, is quoted. He says it's good opportunities for members of the public to express their concerns. And then this representative from Pilgrim Harbor says no one is willing to come out and say what they're going to do. We don't get a straight answer. This is my favorite.
Right.
Project manager Anthony Johnson was not available to comment. That proof,
Yeah.
that's proof. Well, this hearing reminds me of when the power lines are going to come through Wallingford, the expanded power lines, and there were presentations made and people were invited to get up and address their concerns. But we know that the power company back in the day when the power lines came through, maybe, 10, 12 years ago, they could do whatever they want to do.
Right.
And having a public hearing and hearing the neighbors' concerns was salve.
Right.
It wasn't a cure. They weren't going to change the way they were going to do things. It was, you can come and express your concerns, we're glad to hear from you, but they were going to do whatever they needed to do. So I'm just not sure where this is all going. I think this meeting that they're going to have, this kind of meeting has the potential to ramble and not have a clear, concise point to it. I mean, generally the way they start out, they say, you, Mr. Eversource representative, would you care to present? And they say yes, and they go to maps and charts and all this kind of stuff. Meanwhile, people are waiting for them to get to the point, and it goes on for 2 or 3 hours, and in the end, no one is really happy. But I think one thing that should be ticked off right away is, just as they start, is nail down exactly what locations are going to be impacted, so that someone maybe sitting out there can go home if they're they're not going to be impacted.
Right.
So there should be a quick list of what's going to be impacted. Then I think there needs to be a clear, concise expression on the part of Eversource as what their standards are for selecting the trees. Rather, because right now we're awash. They had plenty of opportunity to come up with that, but apparently they haven't. Or is it just subjective opinion depending on the site, and there are no written standards or no standards they want to admit to? Or is it clear cutting?
Right.
Or is it just sort of chaotic? I mean, I think at the meeting, that stuff should be out there right up front in a very concise way before Eversource kind of has a chance to wander all over the globe with their speech. Yeah, we take your concerns very seriously, and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, final thoughts?
Well, just that I'm a little encouraged by,
I threw my notes away.
No, it's all right.
so
No, it's okay. I think you make a good point about
Yeah.
the difficulty and sometimes this is almost a state issue. I mean, the governor There was some report after that 2011 snowstorm that said here to Eversource, here's what you need to do. And Eversource says that's what they're trying to comply with. But what I think plays in this neighborhood's favor is this presentation before the town council was requested by Mayor Dickinson.
Yeah.
So he, obviously knows some things about this. I don't think he's taking sides in the issue, but certainly having the mayor requesting the presentation and not just an individual counselor, I think increases the neighborhood's chances of having some influence on the. You have Tom Laffin, who's the vice chairman of the council, in the story saying, hey, I want to hear the presentation, but the plan seems a little aggressive to me. And you also happen to have Joe DiNatale, who's a local developer, a well-respected developer, I think, who lives in this neighborhood and has also expressed some concern. And he seems to have, he has a little more expertise, I would think, in this area than your average resident living in that neighborhood. So there
Yeah.
are some things in their favor.
Well, the Record Journal will, I am sure, be covering this in great
Yes.
detail,
Yes.
following with interviews, quotes, and
Yes.
the usual stuff, and we'll have ample time to comment before the chainsaws
Right.
come out.
Right, we should hear what Eversource has to say, too.
Oh, yeah.
At the council meeting. Right, we'll hear that. We'll hear a little more
Well,
about it.
So there's a new youth risk survey done, this health survey, and I think a couple of years ago we
Yeah.
we commented on that, and this is the second one. There was a presentation, I believe, downtown at Hubcap a couple of days ago, and there's a summary of the survey in the Record Journal by Matt Zabarik. And the headline was, "Fewer Wallingford Students Drinking Survey Shows." I'm sure there are a lot of categories.
Right.
But just one or two of the sentences, and I'll get your thoughts on it. On the 2015 survey, the percentage of students who reported talking on a cell phone while driving dropped from 30.5 to 27.6%. And the percentage who reported texting or emailing while driving, dropped from 33 to 30.1%. I got my thoughts on the survey, but you're my expert my expert witness here, my expert man on the street, on all topics Wallingford. What do you think?
Well, first of all, we tend to focus in on the drinking and quite often drug use
Okay.
in these surveys.
It's
and
more
that's
salacious, isn't
that's
it?
well,
That's
yeah,
more
and I
tabloid.
know.
Come on,
well,
Ralph, that's
the,
more
the
tabloid.
good thing, yeah, no, it does, no doubt, it seems that way.
It seems.
But probably more out of habit, and
Yeah.
Lord knows the editor of the paper needs to keep an eye on these things.
Yeah, right.
But the thing about this survey that I did find interesting last time around, and hopefully maybe we can get some copies of the entire survey and maybe pull some other things out, is I was much more interested in these things like texting and driving, and also things about depression and suicide. The last survey, I think there were some things that jumped out at us about the mental health aspect of being a high school student. So,
Yeah, my first disclaimer is we got a segment of this show about these surveys, and we don't have the actual
Right, we
survey,
don't.
which is against my journalistic
Right, okay,
standards.
right,
You know, if we're reporting on a survey,
Right.
we should actually have the survey.
Right,
But at
good
this
point.
time, I've tried to get it.
Right.
We don't have it yet, but we will. In time. The other question that popped in my mind is, so what are the policymakers going to do in view of this new information, if anything? How does this change the decision-making process, or is it sort of, well, it's nice to have, we'll put it in the file, steady as she goes?
right.
It's sort of okay, kind of a so what, because I didn't see anything in here that was a radical change from the earlier survey. In the political circles, it's sort of within the margin of error.
Right.
These weren't big drops or increases in anything from drinking to smoking pot to
Right.
texting while driving. They're sort of
Right.
small potatoes, small changes. Your thoughts on that point?
Well, I think after the last survey, there was some attempt at some town-wide effort to address some of the issues, and I think the town health department was involved in it. I can't remember exactly what happened there. And in the story, I believe, Craig Turner mentions that, they took the last survey results, and I believe here's the part here. Turner and Ken Welch, who's the co-founder of Coalition for a Better Wallingford, to reduce the percentage of students who reported using handheld devices while driving, Turner and Welch attended driver education courses to give students and their parents the collected data and emphasize the importance of their behavior. So I'm not disagreeing with anything you said. There's the example that the story cites of how the data is used.
Okay. Mayor Dickinson, last paragraph.
Yeah.
Mayor Dickinson, who attended the presentation, said that though the declining use of drugs and alcohol among students is encouraging, more studies over a longer period of time are needed. Very diplomatic. I don't really know, based on this survey, whether there is a declining use of drugs and alcohol. All I know is the tabulations of the survey, which depends upon the credibility of the students,
Right.
And
Right.
a lot of other variables. So I think the survey is sort of imprecise, and that's where I would start
Okay.
with it. So we have these candidate forums, these local candidate
Mm-hmm.
forums coming up, sort of a rite of passage, when you're running for office
Right.
locally. There's a change in the format, I understand.
Mm-hmm.
I've taken this from an article in the Record Journal, October 18, and now the candidate forum organizers are taking questions from the public.
Right.
What do you know about this? What's the role left for the reporters? Who's going to show up from the newspapers?
Right.
Is there going to be, if you know, is there going to be a student from the high schools, or
Yeah.
is Luther Trammell from the Register going to show? Just what do you know?
Yeah, not as much as I'd like to know.
Okay.
But what I do know is
Yeah.
that the Record Journal was contacted about sending a questioner. So the fact that they're taking forum questions from the public, as far as I know, does not mean that, there won't be questioners from the local newspapers and a student questioner.
Okay.
But I'll keep you posted on it.
So when the reporter goes, from the reporter from the Record Journal
Yeah.
goes, do you guys get together and huddle and, think up the hardest hitting question, or how does that all work? What's the dynamics?
good.
Yeah.
Usually the reporter and the editor who works with the reporter closest will get together and, come up with some topics that they want to cover and develop specific questions. We don't have we used to very easily be able to have someone go and ask questions and also report on the forum. And so it was a lot easier to have two people at the forum. Sometimes now we're sending someone to ask questions and also try to report on the forum, which I think makes it a little more challenging.
Yeah. From reading the article on October 18, it seems like there's going to be a lot of people up on the stage.
Yeah.
And they listed,
Right.
like 8 or 10
Right.
or something like that. And with a limited amount of time, it seems like it's little more than a photo op. That
Right.
the questions and answers kind of have to be superficial because everyone needs their time, and there's a big, long row of questions. I don't see how you can really scratch beneath the surface. I don't know if there's another way or a better way. I mean, let's give that a shot. It just seems like the stage is a little bit too crowded to get some good, solid, hard-hitting questions and meaningful answers from everybody. But
I agree.
yeah.
And they're what are they going to try to do in 2.5 hours for all those?
I guess.
candidates?
I'm not really sure how that's going to work.
I mean, let's face it, it's challenging for you and I, sometimes experienced people who prepare and ask questions to get
Yeah.
specific answers.
It also seems that this election on the state level is pretty low-key. I just haven't seen any ads yet, I don't think,
No.
in the Record Journal. Not a
No,
lot of
they're
lawn
coming.
signs. Okay.
Hopefully they are.
Not a lot of lawn signs. I got a couple of mailers, but
No,
it just
I would
seems
agree with
sort
you.
of, I'm not sure what's going on, but
No, and despite the fact that, we have an open seat here in
Yeah.
Wallingford,
Right.
which doesn't always happen, so I would agree that it's
yeah.
been low-key.
So a little, let's call it a budget note.
Okay.
That appeared in the paper, October 14, Record Journal. There was a little item. reminding us that the Board of Education had a surplus at the end of this past fiscal year.
Right.
According to the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, the CAFR, the Board of Ed had a $785,000 surplus. That number is no longer operative for this article of October 14. This talks about a surplus of $655,000. So I don't know what happened to the other $200,000 or so, but there's a $655,000 surplus that the Board of Ed is rolling in to an account that they can use at their discretion, in the future. So it's just a reminder that when budgets are prepared and debated on and discussed, they've already got $655 left over from the prior year. Now, the surplus may sound a lot of money, but based on the amount of their budget, I don't think it's that bad. It doesn't offend me that they have some money. They had a $96.5 million budget, so that's a lot of money, and they ended up, according to this article, with $655,000 in surplus. So I don't begrudge them that.
No,
Yeah.
not at all.
Okay. We have been talking, you and I, about this decision by a Superior Court judge. He usually sits in London, but he handled a very controversial case on what's called the complex litigation docket out of New Britain. The complex litigation docket is reserved for the most nasty cases with dozens of witnesses and thousands of pages of documents. This is, of course, Judge Mukausher, who decided that the way the state of Connecticut funds public education is so arbitrary that it is unconstitutional. And we've been talking about that. We're going to be talking more about it as time goes on. And it's 90 pages with about another 150 pages of exhibits and footnotes. So we're kind of breaking this down, you and I, into subtopics. And the topic, Bruce, can I get a drum roll? The topic for tonight, there it is, bam, Connecticut's teacher evaluation and compensation systems are impermissibly disconnected from student learning, so concludes Judge Mukausher. And he has about 12 or so pages that says, you got to be kidding. Teacher evaluations are ineffective. They don't show the good teachers from the bad teachers because almost everyone gets a decent rating. And he goes on to explain this. I just want to pick up some language and see if I can shock you a little bit with it.
Right.
The decision is written in a very, as you will see, matter-of-fact layman's language, no jargon, no legal expressions to confuse the reader, and it's really, I think, good reading for anyone interested in education or involved in education. Yeah. So I'm going to be skipping here because there's a lot of stuff. But he starts out in this subtopic: most of the state's education money is spent on teachers. Okay. Skipping. The problem is that in Connecticut there is no way to know who the best teachers are, and no rational and substantial connection between their compensation and their effect on teaching children. Skipping here. Right. A virtually useless evaluation system is constitutionally inadequate to undergird the state's largest financial commitment to education. As with the other key points, students can't receive a constitutionally adequate educational opportunity when something of this importance to school has no rational, substantial, and verifiable connection to effective teaching. I'm going to take a breath here. I got more to read, but your thoughts on this?
Well, I really
so
like that the first quote that you read was, the problem is that in Connecticut there is no way to know who the best teachers are, and no rational, substantial connection between their compensation and their effect on teaching children. This issue of teacher compensation, at least this is my opinion, is often taken up by people who would like to blame all the wrongs in the world on teachers and have a lot of gripes against teachers and teachers' pay. I don't think that's ever where I've come at it or you've come at it. In fact, I can remember years ago you bringing up the point on this show that teachers are underpaid. that we give them very valuable work to do, and often aren't compensating them. So I wanted to just make that point right from the outset, that that's not what this is, at least for me, this is not where it's about. I don't think for you. And I think even for the judge. But that said, it is a dysfunctional evaluation system, and that's not anti-teacher. That's just, I think he lays out a wonderful case, and probably even shows, too, as you'll go on here, how teachers and administrators and the state haven't exactly worked to change that. But
Yeah.
that would be my initial.
So going back to the comment
Yeah,
I made,
right.
I think like maybe 3 years ago, I'm not
Right,
really sure.
right.
I said I wouldn't begrudge teachers getting more money, but we will need better teachers, not necessarily different teachers,
Right.
not necessarily different
Right.
people, but better people, and that was in the context of class size. They would need the skills to manage growing class sizes, and an increased class size is an anathema to any board member worth his or her salt, but taxpayers have a stake in that, because the smaller the class size, the more teachers,
Right.
and and so on and so forth. So yeah, so he sort of suggests that maybe the right teachers in the right spots teaching the right classes, maybe, he didn't come out and say this, we're going to get to this, maybe should get more money, and maybe their salary should be more competitive, but it's sort of that thought that I was
right.
that I
And
was getting
one of
to.
the reasons
Yeah.
we know, and I don't want, but it is in this first section. One of the reasons we know the system he cites right off the bat is 98% of all the teachers in the state are marked as proficient or even exemplary, and that should set off a red flag that there's something
Something off.
Yes.
So continuing on with part of what he says, he says, it hardly seems unreasonable to evaluate teachers partly based on how much their students have learned from them. All right?
Right.
The state's own expert, a guy called Eric Hanushek, insisted this was a vital element. This is the state of Connecticut's own
Right.
witnesses. It's a vital element, saying that these so-called measures of student learning should make up around 35% of teachers' evaluations. Continuing on here. Whoop. I'm going to skip a lot because
Right,
there's a
good.
lot of detail.
Right.
And we don't, here's the time, we don't
No,
have
I
time to do
skipped a lot,
The
too.
state teachers' evaluation system is little more than cotton candy in a rainstorm. Let me just read that again. The state of Connecticut is a defendant here, okay?
Right.
They've been sued by this group saying that the state doesn't have it right when it comes to financing public education. The state's teacher evaluation system is little more than cotton candy in a rainstorm. Everything about it suggests it was designed to give only the appearance of imposing a significant statewide evaluation standard. These empty evaluation guidelines mean good teachers can't be recognized, and that's kind of what I was hoping
Right.
to get at. Good teachers can't be recognized, and bad teachers reformed or removed. It goes on, beyond a reasonable doubt, the state's teacher evaluation system creates no rational, substantial, and verifiable link between teacher evaluations and student learning. It's not merely a matter of the standard being weak. The standard fails the constitutional test because it doesn't even honestly do what it says it's doing. Let me just stop there and take a breath and
Well,
get your,
just
get your thoughts on that.
to make the point that
Yeah.
The judge does detail in two or three pages here that there was a system that was supposed to, make about a third of a teacher's evaluation hinged to student performance, and then it just got completely watered down
Under
to
political pressure.
right by the state. I'm sure unions were involved, superintendents of school, local boards of education, which makes him arrive at that great quote that the system is little more than cotton candy in a rainstorm.
So right now across the state, as our viewers know, teachers' compensation is based primarily on how long they've been in the job
Yes.
and whether they have a bachelor's, a master's, or a PhD.
Right.
And the judge makes the point, I'm not going to read all the language here, that the witnesses in the case, the judge isn't making this up.
Right.
The witnesses in the case seem to have established that teachers grow and learn and become better teachers during the first 5 years on the job, and after that, their growth kind of tails off because they've reached sort of a plateau. Of course, they keep learning like anyone else on the job does. So that's the contextual background. How long you've been in the job and what degree you have. So with that in mind, let me just go back to my opinion here. Although state officials, local board members, superintendents, principals, and teachers testified, no one said long years on the job and advanced degrees always meant good teaching. Yet in Connecticut, these two factors, which may have almost no role in good teaching, play virtually the entire role in deciding how much a teacher makes. Skipping a little bit, the billions that flow to increase teachers' pay in this state have nothing to do with either how much teachers are needed or some recognized measure of how well they teach. Keep going. Here we go.
Well, it's just that it just challenges this notion. I think, one of the first questions, you find out that someone has gotten a teaching job, and one of the first things that eventually comes up, or if it's someone you know or a family member, is, when are you going to get your master's degree? Or where are you on your master's degree? Because we all know in this state, we might not know anything about the teacher's contract, but we know that if you get your master's degree, you get a pay increase.
Yeah.
So it's become so part of the culture, and he refutes it.
He challenges that.
He challenges it, which is a good thing.
Yeah, with evidence. I mean,
right,
it's
with
just,
evidence. Yes,
it's
right,
not his
right,
opinion.
right.
The state sees itself as powerless here. It set up a system of local control in which school districts must agree on these things with teachers. But if the system was set up by the state, then the state is responsible for the system. Any obstacle to a rational system the state has set up, the state can take down. The state is not powerless. There are ways the state could link compensation to effective teaching, but it's nothing to do lightly. I'm almost done here. It also doesn't mean there is no role to play for seniority beyond 5 years and advanced degrees.
Absolutely. No, absolutely.
It's not as though any conceivable role these things might play would be irrational. The problem is that it's irrational for these two factors to play the only role. The court isn't going to decide how to pay teachers. The only thing the court concludes is that beyond a reasonable doubt, the teacher pay system we have lacks a rational, substantial, and verifiable connection between teaching need and teaching pay. And that's all I'd underline, but it's pretty thick. Now, one element that is not in here, is just sort of commentary. I think people go into teaching in part because they see it as a career path and a job that they can have for 20 or 30 years.
Right.
And so they want to see progress in their salary, and that's kind of the bargain that they make.
Right.
Yeah, it may be that I'm not a better teacher in my 11th or 12th or 13th year, and it may be I'm adding no additional value to student learning, but as a business matter, part of the deal we strike is that this is my long-term career that I expect to have in 20 or 30 years, and I'm giving up maybe other avenues that I could take.
Right.
So in a purely market value sense, I suppose, you can say, well, if you're worth no more in your 10th year of teaching than you were in the 9th year of teaching, why should you get a raise? You're worth no more as a teacher.
Right.
You're no more valuable to the education system.
Right.
One answer to that, yeah, that may be, and I know, there's a contract, but the general expectation of teachers is they will sort of grow and be able to have a good, solid, middle-class life, and this is sort of an implicit bargain, not the labor contract, but the implicit bargain that they will grow as inflation grows at least, or something close to that. Your thoughts?
Okay. I want to, well, first of all, I liked also that the judge made the case that teachers don't get into the profession necessarily for pay. That there's some concern and care about students. So again, that just showed his the fact that he was taking into account all things here. This was not meant to be anti-anything. I also want to point out that the judge also said in the decision, the parties agree that paying and evaluating principals and superintendents is handled even more loosely and
Oh.
locally.
Yeah.
So when you read this and you find out how the teacher evaluation system is not working, be aware that for principals and superintendents it's even worse. And we know that in Wallingford because, and this is no disrespect towards the current superintendent or the Board of Education, but when they evaluate him, their main takeaway is that he works too hard. Now, that I'm sure he does work very hard, but you know what, my boss would probably say that I work hard too, but I need more specific feedback than that. That's not an evaluation. Ralph works hard. That's not serving me. So we know that locally. That's the kind of evaluation that we tend to get from the Board of Education. And I just wanted to make one other point. You know, we're so immersed in student testing and what third graders do and what fifth graders do and what they do in English and science and subsets and sets and the judge makes the point, which is wonderful. Why bother measuring how students are doing if it never has any direct connection to how they're being taught?
Yeah.
So we spend all this time focusing on how the children, evaluating them, calling them below standards, and yet the adults in the system aren't held to that same.
So these factual findings are a real eye-opener, and one reason why they are is that I think if you went to any town in the state of Connecticut and asked a board member or superintendent or a principal, you know, I doubt whether your teacher evaluation system is any good. They will say, oh, it's wonderful.
Well,
They have a stake in the system, and they're sort of tethered to the system. So it's hard to get honest criticism, you know, about how their hands are tied because they have to paint the picture. This is a system that they have managed, therefore they're tied to it, therefore it's good. And I think maybe it's not in Bridgeport or East Hartford or some of these, you know, problem towns, but I think that is what one of the problems are. It's so hard to get a dispassionate, objective view of how easy is it for a Board of Ed to deal with a tenured teacher who needs a little uptick in his or her performance.
Right.
It's hard to have that kind of, oh, we don't, you know, all our teachers are great. No, we coach and we, you know, we have a professional development and it works really well. No one will admit of any problems.
no, and
So,
the same
It
dynamic.
takes a judge to,
Right, and the same
sort through
dynamic
that.
usually exists between the Board of Education and school administrators.
yeah.
And as you watch the education system, you know, there's just not enough disagreement sometimes is the thing you'd say.
Well, let's move on, but this case is under appeal.
Right.
And the buzz that I'm picking up, and you know, my colleagues, is that the Supreme Court will overturn it in some way. The judge's factual findings can't be overturned because that's based on evidence. But if I was a teacher, if I was an administrator, I don't think I would be too alarmed.
No.
I think, you know, this needed to be said. It's great the way the judge said it. Everyone should read it and maybe be a little more clear-eyed as to what's going on in the system.
Well, just
So,
one other
yeah.
thing
Go
to
ahead.
connect to that. No, this is not going to change because the judge has written this decision, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I wish it would, but that's just not the way it works. It will change if people read this decision, go to their local Board of Education, ask questions, maybe go down to a town committee, get involved in a party, run for the Board of Education. To me, that's the one piece of this that the judge leaves out, is that, you know, we kind of have the education system that we deserve
Yeah.
because not enough people are involved. And my advice to anybody who cares about this is read this decision, stop screaming at your TV, stop looking at the cable news networks constantly and paying attention only to all these national races. You can make a difference at your local school board. And by the way, as you just reminded us, they have a $96 million budget. So there's a large chunk of change that's
Yeah,
involved.
I think the teacher's contract is being negotiated as we talk. I think
Right.
I think it's work in progress. One of the obstacles that a member of the public has is they want to get to the bottom of, let's say, teacher evaluations and
hard.
teachers' pay. It's very hard to
Hard,
do
Mike.
it,
I
and
agree.
when a contract comes up for negotiation, the council handles all that in secret.
I
And so does
agree.
the Board of Ed. They handle all that in secret, and they
Right.
come out and they give you like
No.
2 minutes of fluff.
No.
And so it can be very frustrating. But should we move on?
Well, but just
Yeah,
not
go
as
ahead.
frustrating as spending all your time
Yeah,
concentrating on national elections.
let's do that.
Right, that you can't influence as easily. That's my only point. It might be less frustrating.
So let's
actually. Okay.
let's
Yeah,
wade
let's
into
go
the
in. Yes, right.
Hillary
Yep.
Clinton, Donald Trump
Okay.
matter. We're producing this on Wednesday, and later on
Right.
tonight, of course, is that third debate. We don't know how it's going to turn out, and one of the disadvantages of a weekly show is we produce on Wednesday, it's broadcast on Thursday. In that 24-hour period, a whole lot of things could change. So I try to pick on comments that have some stability,
Right, right.
rather than immediacy, because it can be obsolete in just a few hours.
In the business we call, they would stand.
Yeah.
Something would stand no matter
So
what
let's-
happens. Go
so
ahead.
let's give that a shot.
Yeah, go
You
ahead,
know, let's
try.
give that. So there is an article in the Record Journal, October 9,
Uh-huh.
and it talked about I think it's the executive director of one of the fact-checking organizations, PolitiFact. Oh, the deputy editor, Katie Sanders, she gave a speech on fact-checking in this election. I think Mike Savino might have written this article, but the lead sentence is, thanks to a presidential candidate with a reputation for ignoring facts and doubling down on inaccuracies, an editor with one of the nation's most renowned fact-checking organizations says 2016 is the absolutely worst year for truth. And this was, again, Katie Sanders. She talks about Clinton and she talks about Trump. So let's, taking it in order of
Right.
how it was written. Trump's statements rated false or worse, PolitiFact deputy editor Katie Sanders said, and the organization has dubbed this the pants on fire election. Liar, liar.
Right, liar,
Pants on fire?
right.
Yeah, that's where that comes from. She said that according to PolitiFact, a combined 52% of Trump's statements checked by the organization's staff, 52%, had been rated false or pants on fire, a statement that is not accurate and makes a ridiculous claim, by 52%. By comparison, Mitt Romney, the 2012 Republican nominee, had 26% of his claims rated false or pants on fire, the second highest rate among major party nominees since 2008. Okay? Clinton, meanwhile, has had 12% of her statements rated as false or pants on fire, and has a higher rate of true or mostly true statements, 51%, than any major party presidential nominee since 2008. Despite describing this year's election as being the recent one most devoid of truth, this election most devoid of truth, Sanders says it's too early to say that facts no longer matter. Another couple paragraphs I want to read from The Economist, but some thoughts on that, on fact-checking at this point.
Well, I don't think things have gotten any better since October 9th. So whatever,
Right.
so whatever statistics were given on October 9th, and I do think that the national media goes to great lengths to fact check, and I think that's something that smaller newspapers, local newspapers, should devote more resources to.
Certainly you can do that locally.
Locally,
on
yes,
local
right. And
issues.
it doesn't happen as much locally. And a lot of times you do it on this show, and it's one of the reasons I think the show is important, to have someone who's reading what's reported and said and trying to measure its accuracy. So
So in The Economist magazine, which, as you know, I think is probably the best news magazine published today, they have offices all over the world, but it's primarily a London-based, a England-based publication. A lot of their spellings, are English-based. In a recent article, they entitle the Debasing of American Politics. I'm going to start about a little more than halfway down, and it goes this way. If Mr. Trump actually wins the election, Republicans will have to meet the expectations he has created of protectionism, spending increases allied to tax cuts, hostility to foreigners, and a retreat from decades of foreign policy. That would make America poorer, weaker, and less secure. Meanwhile, the Republican Party would still need the support of those who have cheered on Mr. Trump. Far from being renewed, politics would become even nastier and more brutal. Last paragraph. Must it be this way? Once you start throwing mud in politics, it is very hard to stop. Yet every so often you get a glimpse of something better. When Todd Akin lost a winnable Senate seat in 2012 after haplessly trying to draw a distinction between legitimate rape and the not-so-legitimate sort, Republican candidates and political consultants took notice. Such a realization, however, needs to strike home on a grand scale. Healthy politics is not gang warfare. It involves compromise, because to yield in some areas is to move forward in others. It is about antagonists settling on a plan, because to do nothing is the worst plan of all. It requires the insight that your opponent can be honorable and principled, however strongly you disagree. The 2016 election campaign has poured scorn on such ideas. All Americans are worse off as a result. Thought I'd just read that.
Well said.
Your thoughts on where we're going from here in the national campaign?
Well,
Are you hiding in your bunker? You don't want to come out until,
No, because you have to confront these things.
Yeah.
But to think that one side or the other wins here, no, we're all losing in this election, and we will probably all lose in its aftermath until we find somebody, and I don't know who that person is, that can make some attempt to unify this country. And
Yeah, I think I said on a couple of shows
Yeah, you
ago,
did.
and it's sort of an ongoing theme that a worry that I have, that the country has become ungovernable, unmanageable because of the intolerance one side
Yes.
has for the other side.
Right.
There are more and more articles coming out about the deterioration of the American politic, the deterioration of American society, making it impossible for one side or the other to govern. I think that's true. Maybe after the election, you and I will start a let's drop our anger day or something.
Right. No.
I don't know. I don't really know what the answer is. And we'll all wear shirts of a color, some purple color or something like that. That's all we have time for.
Good.
Unless you got a final.
No, I don't. No,
Final
that's
thought.
good.
I
That
thought
was
you
good.
had something there in the
Nope,
tip of your
nope.
tongue. So we produce these shows on Wednesday, folks. You got to see them Thursdays at 9 o'clock. It's really the best time to see this is a Mike show. If you miss that, Fridays is 6:30. And then the weekend, we're not being broadcast by WPAA, but WPAA's got a website, WPAA.tv. You go to that website, there's a video on demand button, click that, and all the WPAA shows come down. It's, they drop down in a menu. It's very intuitive. If you don't want to see the Citizen Mike show that way on the internet, then it's Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday at 9 o'clock. Hey, if it's 9 at night, it's Citizen Mike. Good night, everyone. Thanks for tuning in.